From religion to wrestling, gumbo to grits, politics to poetry, and all things Southern in between, this is Take on the South. Produced by the Institute for Southern Studies and hosted by the College of Arts and Sciences at the University of South Carolina, Take on the South examines the highs and lows of the American South, examines the truths and fictions of the country's most distinctive region, and picks the brains of some of its most accomplished students. To understand the South, you need to take it on, and that's what we'll be doing. Join us as we take on the South.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Take on the South, podcast of the University of South Carolina's Institute for Southern Studies. I am one of the hosts, Emily Allen, and I'm excited to share with you one of my conversations about history and culture of the South. And our guest for this episode is Danielle Davis, who is a producer, musicologist whose scholarly narratives engage music, history, and the art of listening. She is a doctoral candidate in musicology at Florida State University, an inaugural Mellon ACLS Dissertation Innovation Fellow, and Pre-Doctoral Fellow at Emory University's James Weldon Johnson Institute. And today we'll be discussing her dissertation project, the Tidewater Trio Project, Virginian Hip-hop in Hampton Roads, which ventures boldly into the realm of record production, offering fresh perspectives on cultural productions of Shay Haley, Hugo, Pharrell Williams, inviting audiences to reimagine how history resonates through sound. So excited to talk about your project. Danielle, do you want to tell us a little bit about your work and yourself?
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you for having me, Emily. It's been such a long journey since we were students at Florida State together, but I'm so glad to be able to finally show you the end or the first part of my musicological journey. One thing you should know about me is that I'm a string player, and I have been playing viola since I was 12 years old. I was classically trained, and I went to a historically Black institution called Hampton University, and I was a music ed major. I ended up becoming a musicologist because I was really interested in history and how you would teach history through songs or in a general music classroom, let alone what I was trained in, which is band, orchestra, chorus. And I would mainly do strings. And so one of the things that I like to do in my research is, one, to think about how we listen to others around us, and knowing that it's pretty much a sound and music are parts of culture, parts of processes that we use to interact as humans. And I find that fascinating. So I have kind of put my viola down for a moment to learn how to produce hip hop, or not necessarily just hip hop, but just to learn the production skills of what it means to be a record producer.
Yeah, that's really awesome. And it's great that this has brought, all your worlds together in this project.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think that you're tying a lot of things that this podcast speaks to, which is place in a certain way as well, and how you're sounding place and experiences in Virginia and whatnot through these listening experiences that you're offering to folks, both on this podcast, but also in the completed project. Would you be willing to provide maybe a little bit of background on maybe Virginia itself, the festival scene, things like that as well that speak to your project?
Yeah. So I know one of the things that you had mentioned when you're reading my bio and stuff is I am really trying to sound a musical history about three really important acts from Virginia when it comes to Southern hip hop that haven't really been written about in a academic or scholarly way. The three men that make up these different musical acts, their names are Pharrell Williams, who many people know, Chad Hugo, and also Shay Haley. Now, I call this project the Tidewater Trio Project, not because there are three men involved, but because the three groups that they form together and apart are significant in that the music, the tracks, the albums, the even the clothes, all of that kind of ushered in a different way of hearing the South, and specifically Hampton Roads, Virginia, or it's also known as the Tidewater region in Virginia, and how it was heard at a time when the South was really starting to become more visible as a contributor to the genre outside of this long-held East versus West binary. So the first thing that I really like to look at, or I found really puzzling, was the fact that people did not see Virginia as the South. And I kind of fell into that trap myself when I was studying at Hampton, because I was like, they're sweet. I have to ask them to put sugar in my sweet tea. Like, what is going on? And I understand that they're closer to the Mason-Dixon line, but they're certainly underneath it. Virginia, that whole state, falls below. So it is the South, but it is a very different kind of South. And a lot of the readings that I've done, a lot of the scholars who have inspired my thinking about Southernness and Southness, well, first off, it's always going to go to Regina Bradley, Outcast scholar and amazing Southern hip-hop historian who's so gracious to me throughout this process, letting me study with her for a bit, and just thinking about how do you talk about men who are celebrities and have made a large impact in the culture musically, when it comes to popular music, I should say. They've made an impact that is seen and felt, but what are the documents of this time that we are going to start putting and leaving for the future generations to begin to understand, not only about Virginia as a state, the Tidewater region, or the 757 Hampton Roads, as I said. It's not that these places are not Southern. It's that they are Southern in such a fundamental and almost... It is so far removed from a lot of our reality today in 2020, in the decade of the 2020s, right? That people don't recognize that the hip hop that comes from this region sounds different, looks different, and the history is not going to fit in a simple, and I shouldn't say simple because the work of history is never simple. Never that. Okay. But it is something where I realized that I'm working not only with people who have passed away and dealing with their stories, whether they were musicians or listeners in that region. It was important for me to understand that Southernness is something that is cultural. And just because something is located in the South doesn't mean that it has a popularized understanding of what Southernness is, which again will go back to those very easy markers of authentication. Let's say markers of identification, I would think, the draws, right? Can we actually understand what they're talking about? Is it slow draws? Is it fast? Do they talk about, eating certain kinds of meals that are known in the South, like fried chicken or something like that? But when you get into African-American culture, and this project also looks at Filipino-American culture as well, when you get down to the different markers sonically and otherwise about the South, the general public And even some of us as Southerners have some reality checking or some more growth for us to begin understanding and receiving it as such. Sorry, I rambled, but I'm just doing my thing.
Yeah, you are. You really there were speaking to, one of the points I kind of had in mind to discuss, which is the plurality of Souths that we have present. Like you're doing a lot of kind of translocal and interracial discussions as well with this kind of music that I think are really important for, like you said, challenging us to broaden our conceptions of what it means to be Southern and sounding that and whatnot. So kind of thinking about all these really important points that you've raised, I'm curious in the Tidewater Trio Project, as you've been working on this in terms of your process and collaborations and your work as a producer musicologist, how have you started capturing all of this in this project?
A good bit of capturing it looks like traditional musicological research at first. So a lot of times I was interviewing folks who went to certain festivals in Virginia. The one that I am really interested in this particular project is looking at Pharrell Williams' Something in the Water Festival. And one of the things that I'm talking about specifically in the chapter about this is that I'm looking at not only Pharrell Williams and using this kind of DIY concert vlog aesthetic. That means, I'm mainly recording on phones, very low budget, very easy to access materials, documenting the scenes, the settings, the surroundings, actually interviewing people, either talking to them in between the sets or getting their information and doing a follow-up interview later. It would just depend. And it's very, especially since 2020 and the pandemic, it changed. The methodology kind of changes a little bit because you have to figure out different ways to be safe, how to approach people and whatnot. But I like trying to understand how festivals kind of, festival research, when you sit back and you sit and understand that these are events that pretty much sensationalize, or it is a grand scale or a large almost performance of the values of a particular culture, space, or place. I learned that really quickly, that the fact that Pharrell had Something in the Water and some of the events that it was replacing in the history of Virginia made it even more significant that he was able to pull off such a feat in the midst of a long-held pandemic. It's almost like his career saw the change into a new millennium, but then also the planning of and the putting on of this festival is kind of, it happened right at the transition where the way that we think about our health, our bodies, our ability to do things physically or otherwise, even just paying attention, has changed significantly because of what it means for us to gather. And so hosting the festival in the years, it's been off and on. This festival is actually very interesting from a case study perspective, and not to get too like gloves on scientific, I'm gonna put my beakers down, right? It's more so a situation of recognizing that in order to have these events, you have to be around people, and you're going to have to listen to the space that you're in and the place that you may have traveled to, maybe it was, 10 minutes from your house, or maybe you traveled, 100 miles to get there. All of those factors happening at that moment in a particular space over a sort of theme, or basically trying to get you to a specific destination to have a musical experience, would be the best way for me to sum up all the findings that I had about listening when it comes to Southern hip hop from the 757, from the places that Chad, Pharrell, and Shay are from.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think I'm really excited to hear about this connection of, kind of being on the ground, like you're getting at, and then how this translates into the actual album that you're working on, which is really cool. Like this kind of multimodal approach that you've taken with this project. So I think that's really, really innovative in a lot of really significant ways. I think, especially for our field, considering we're musicologists, we need to actually consider this stuff more.
Yeah.
I know you had some other points too, in terms of backgrounds that maybe you want to share with your presentation for our listeners and viewers.
Sure. Yeah. I think the first thing that we need to really understand about the Something in the Water Festival is the notion that there is so many complicated relationships when you enter those festival grounds, or if you are just in the vicinity of it as a local, whether that's, I have to sit in traffic way longer because all these artists are showing up. And I think too, one of the things about this festival that's really unique is that it's actually on the beach. It's on the ocean front. But these pictures are showing scenes from the one year that it was in DC. And in order to understand why this DC move happened for the second year of a festival this large, you have to kind of go back and understand what's the history of this region when it comes to people gathering, fellowshipping, and assembling in one space. And so the first thing that I came across in understanding was the Greek Fest tragedy, or the Greek Fest riots. Now, if you've ever heard of festivals, I think recently there was a Hulu documentary about the Freaknik Festival in Atlanta, where I am originally from. Around that time, there was another festival in Virginia Beach called Greek Fest, and many students from all up the southeastern part of the United States, specifically at historically Black institutions, were going up to Virginia Beach at the beginning of the school year during Labor Day weekend to have their last big hurrah before the school year started. Now, it's called Greek Fest because it's also associated with the National Panhellenic Council, which is, I think, known for many of the Black sororities and fraternities. And so you'll see on this picture on the right, or I'm sorry, this picture on the left here is a newspaper clipping from 1990 of a Labor Fest event. Now, because Greek Fest was a event that happened year after year, I think it was really important for me to think about the oceanfront as a space where Black people can gather, even knowing that historically that has not always been the case, especially in Virginia Beach. They may have helped build the boardwalk. They may have helped, build and work at all of the hotels along the oceanfront. But for many, many decades, they were not really able to experience the beach in the same way that white locals and visitors alike were able to do. In 1989, and the festival, the Greek Fest, had been happening I think maybe around 86. So it had been happening for a few years. But September 4th, September 5th, 1989, when they had Greek Fest, you had a lot of Black students again coming over to the oceanfront, walking, the boardwalk, also out on the streets, like the, I can't think of it now, out on the Strip. So if you saw a lot of Black students, a lot of, people who are of darker complexion out on the beach was not historically something that people were used to in the area, especially some of the shopkeepers and things. And there was something different about that night where when the lights, or not the lights, but it's funny when you think about it. Like if you were in a stadium, the lights would go off and they'd tell you it's time for the show. But the show ended up being a very horrific and violent scene that night because as the sun went down, some owners of like local owners of a business outside of the beach on the Strip, there was like reports of vandalization on the beach. And what I remember, as someone who wasn't born in 1989, but what I do remember from gleaning these memories, from reading these stories, and from listening to reports from back then, hearing the voices of these scared students, Black students, was that it got to the point where they were confusing the Greek Fest goers with potentially locals or people who were bad actors. They don't really know who those people were, but they know that they maybe bashed in a window, and that was enough to get enough calls. The mayor at the time called the National Guard, and from there they were just rounding up these Black students. If you were a young person at that time and they saw you out walking the Strip or being around the beach, they would have assumed that you were part of this festival and you were out, committing acts of vandalization. And a lot of students were arrested. There was one man, Melvin, I believe. His name is Melvin Moore. He had a long-standing lawsuit with the police, the local police, because he was badly brutalized that night and detained unlawfully too. So some of the things that I came across, not only just looking at pictures of what Greek Fest was, how it was depicted in the Norfolk Journal and Guide, you see these darker figures of these Black students, in their beach wear, and they're saying, in the bubble, you're getting ready for this year's Greek Fest. There's a sign to Virginia Beach, but there's all of these tanks, and it looks like fighter jets. But what we do know about this image is that it seems like they're going to declare war on these students. And it's even more interesting because Hampton Roads is home to the largest naval base in the world. It is a very internationally diverse place because there are a lot of military families, not just through the Navy, but also all branches are pretty much represented in that area. So the idea that there are tanks and militarization of the beach just for Black students trying to relieve or almost just celebrate the end of their summer became a flip where in April, kind of around the 2010s, they would turn Greek Fest. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm getting very deep in the weeds. I'm going to pull out in just a second. They had Greek Fest in 1989. And because of the militarization, because of all those horrible things, this is 3 years before Rodney King. But it's a very significant event because it made the national news at the time. And it's like a lot of people believe that Virginia Beach and the whole 757 is a very sleepy, average suburban beach town. But knowing that these kinds of violence happened in the midst of also having a good time, it kind of goes back to a lot of the ways that we think about the South in general as a place where horrible acts historically have happened to people of African descent or people of color in general. But knowing that happened there, and then the next year in 1990, they are going to create something called Labor Fest, which was a kind of partnership between NSU and another local businessman. They planned and planned and planned. They had feedback from HBCU students from all over the country talking about how can we plan this event so it could be safer. But there's a thing about over planning, and it went too well almost. And, they were expecting maybe 50,000 people, which, in the early 90s, that's a lot of people in one space. And it ended up being, significantly less, maybe 10,000, if that. So knowing that happened in the 90s, it's going to die down. And then around the 2000s, especially during the late, what is it called? Like the late single 2000s into like 2010s-ish, you're going to have the College Beach Weekend, which is this picture here, where college students, they're going to come not in September, but in April, right before finals week, to get all that stress out, walk the strip, see some honeys, see some fine, looking men or people out there, and, listen to some good music, have pizza, sit by the water, dance. And there would be a lot of fighting, a lot of instances of violence, which I think a lot of people would not expect in a place like Virginia Beach. But the reason why we have to think about the genealogy of festivals in Virginia Beach that way, it will help you understand why there was a need for there to be a something in the water in the first place. So they created that in 2019. It was an amazing event. It got rained out the first day. People got their money back, which is also something like the economic considerations on like how much a ticket would cost, how much is lodging, food in the park, like all of those factors are really important. And knowing that in 2019, it pretty much went off without a hitch. There wasn't much violence reported in the city around that time for, the pandemic to hit in 2020, 2021. There's going to be a few months before, I believe they were supposed to have the festival. Pharrell's cousin, Donovan Lynch, and another woman, DeShayla Harris, lost their lives on the ocean front on the Strip that night in Virginia Beach. And because of the gun violence in that particular area and it not being addressed, and there have been other instances of that kind of violence happening in that region, Pharrell decided to not host the festival. He would cancel it. And then months later, I think about March of 2022, he announced that he was having the festival in DC. And that's where you're going to get, a bigger situation where you're looking at being in between streets and buildings. You're not really looking at beach life. So like even an example right here, like this is the main stage. This is the Sun stage in DC. And so a lot of people were thinking, something in the water. How is this going to be something in the water? Because you're not by the beach. You're on the concrete. You're on the pavement. This was the first one I was actually able to go to. But I know for a fact that the interesting part about him having this festival at this time in this place, when there was so much unjust, or I should say, when there was so much unrest when it comes to the lives of Black people, Pharrell was able to have a moment in DC where he's kind of tying in a lot of these symbolic and historical wins for African Americans. Can I share a little bit of this? I'm going to share this just to show you what it was like to see what DC felt like as a listener in the crowd.
I'm staring at the Capitol right now. See a human beings celebrate Juneteenth weekend. Somebody say freedom!
So that was the first time Pharrell showed up for his big set. That's the one that everybody wants to listen to because he's going to bring out a lot of the artists that he has worked with and collaborated with over the years. And so we were all facing the stage and we hear the music kind of like spill out of the speakers, but he's not there. And then it's like, oh, he's behind us, because on the screen we see Pharrell, and just behind him is the National Mall. I think it's this picture here. And that's June 2022. So thinking about the fact that he created a festival for his region, for his state even to be celebrated, for the special context, the music, the actual foundation of this country to be celebrated for its current musical culture. And to know that all of these political elements shaped how listeners are even able to experience it is something that is worthy of study. And the best way that I did that, or one of the ways that I learned how to sound that, is looking at Stephen Feld's work, who's an ethnomusicologist, and he has this idea of acoustomology where he is thinking about spaces or places, right? Knowing that sounds are happening in relation to one another. And if you're going to do an acoustomological reading of someplace, like he initially was looking at a specific tribe in the rainforest, but people have applied this to hospitals. So why not, an acoustomology of a college classroom or a hip-hop festival in Virginia Beach? But it means doing these readings and listening to the space where the human, the non-human, living things, non-living, there are organic things, birds even, that maybe like are flying around, seagulls. They're all playing a part of this delicate ecosystem that had to be approved by the city, that had to be planned for days and days. Different kinds of emergency plans, evacuation plans, thinking about how the experience was going to be when you walked up to see certain artists on this stage, which is maybe, on this block, and this stage, which is like, 2 blocks down from that. All of those things are important for us to understand when it comes to recognizing festivals. And so what I did in sounding festival scenes was I recorded the moments. I went through the festival being very aware of my senses and trying to remember different kinds of moments or pairing certain sensations with things. So I love going to shows and really feeling like the rumble of the bass move through my legs. It gives me almost like a form of ASMR where I feel the tingles. And especially if it's like live instruments or like just a great track with a beautiful loop, like something that I want to listen to over and over again. Feeling the sound through your body is a different way of making me aware of the space. So if a person spills their strawberry lemonade on me and I smell sticky and artificial and fruity, I'm also going to remember like that was around the time when Little Uzi was playing and there was a mosh, and it's grounding me in this very specific moment in time where even though you're in a crowd, you are hearing things all the time, all kinds of conversations, secrets, strategy plans on how to get out. You're listening to all of that stuff. And I wanted to record that in a way where people could understand the different dynamics that I've almost kind of, spent all this time telling you about. So I can play a little bit of it for you. I think I can play the first song from that chapter because I think it's a great summation of all the things that I've talked about, from the history to just really understanding what this festival is about. So we'll go here. Let's see. Can you hear this?
Yeah. Right. 1989, the number, Greek Fest summer, VA Beach, Riptide take you under. From planet Earth to Neptune, controlled by the water's ancestors step through. Crept through a crevice, met with a raucous applause. Unbothered by the National Guard, writing on the wall illegible. Crowd crushed from a riot or festival, chips fall. Wish Donovan got the call. The game foul when the cops drop the ball. Though we may fall through the cracks in the floor, the story don't end till you erase us all. Move from VA to DC. Cause politics real greasy. To DC we roam, attack of the clones, bask in the music recorded on phones.
I wanted to see Lil Baby too, but it got way too crowded when he went up. Yeah, I just kind of like stood in the middle of that long road, like all the way in the back, and just kind of watched me back there.
So yeah, that's just like the first song from the last chapter. It is called Festival Groove.
That was such a jam. And I could hear, with everything that you've been talking about, I could hear all the different layers of that history and of this place and of these peoples that you are sonically, as you have here, sounding these festival scenes in this way. So it's really cool to see it really be sounded out in this acoustomological kind of way.
Yeah, it was really interesting putting the different layers together with my team. I was really blessed with the Dissertation Innovation Fellowship, where I spent the entire year approaching the story of hip hop in the 757, the story of NERD, the story of the Neptunes, and, events that Pharrell Williams has been able to put on as a solo artist and producer, I have come to really sit back and know that there was only one way to do this project, and it had to be in the form of production that they use, that they are accustomed to, and that their listeners, their fans are used to hearing them.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And, I think one of the kind of broader points I think that people in the humanities, or even just people that aren't necessarily academics, could consider are these creative formats, right? For academic scholarship. So do you see, or how do you see the Tidewater Trio Project opening a door for that path, I guess?
Well, I can't really see what's going to happen. It'll be March 2025 is when the experience will be out in the world and people will be able to experience it, listen to it, sit with it. And I'm really excited about that. I would say that I would like scholars, especially, not just festival scholars, but just in general, to really think about the ways that collaboration can help you articulate your findings in ways that are far more impactful to the people, the places, the spaces that you may spend a lot of your professional and intellectual time studying, in a way that it can be accessible to them. It's going to speak far. I know a lot of people feel that scholarship done for the public is a form of watering it down. But even then, we've been on here for a while talking, because there's so many different layers of this. And I know that maybe not everybody will be able to hear it right when it comes out, but at least I know that it will be out there, that there is explanations as to why, bum rushing into a concert when you don't have tickets is not a safe idea. That is, you're putting everybody in danger when you do that. If you find yourself in a situation where, you are in a large crowded event, what does it mean to be safe? What does it look like to be safe? Because you're meeting a lot of people. You're being around a lot of different people that you may have never met before. So what I would like the Tidewater Trio Project, I think, to live on in academic spaces, I would really hope that the impact would inspire scholars to collaborate and to think about the ways that working with artists, working with people who are not in your field, and also folks who are interested in telling stories or sharing information to the youth, or sharing information to the public that is informed and has been researched well and with care. It's not misinformation. Being able to provide that, I think, is part of the service of what being a scholar and academic, and especially being a professor, is supposed to do. So don't limit yourself to the ways that it can be communicated. Sure, not everybody's theory is for everyone to consume, but I do think that for those who would be interested in learning about what it is that you do and how it could impact their lives, or not be something completely different from what they ever experience in their day-to-day life, and they're just learning more about the world and how it is, there's a place for them to access that information in a way that will impact their lives or change their understanding or just give them, the opportunity in a way that jargon never could. And, a journal article or a monograph may not hit in the same way, or it may not impact the senses or impact the body and the mind in a different way.
Yeah, I think like you were getting at, there's so much we can learn through this kind of work. And like you said, there's so many different layers to this project. We've only scratched the surface of what I know you've been doing. So I wanted to, as we kind of wrap up, open it up to you a little bit more broadly. Other than kind of the points that we've already touched on, is there anything else about this project that you kind of want to leave our listeners and viewers with?
Well, first off, you can follow me on social media. I'll have all the information for Emily to send out. Please follow the Tidewater Trio Project. We will have our digital archive up and running, hopefully by the time this episode comes out. And there'll be a link to that as well if you want to keep up with the progress, you want to see more of what I'm talking about. This is just one of the stories that I'm covering in the album and the dissertation archive. I will just give a little bit of background that I didn't do it at the beginning that I realize is probably important, is that, this project, not only does it study the productions of the Neptunes, NERD, and Pharrell Williams, but it also shares the stories of Virginians, artists from Virginia, and also stories from the past, from the archives, from way back in the 1700s, all the way to probably as recent as 2023. And I think that it's really important that I mention that this region is the place where the first settlers came, where the first slave ships came. It's an hour away from Jamestown. And so recognizing the fact that Virginia is one of the most foundational places to our nation's establishment, its founding. And I think there's no way that history doesn't impact the way these theory groups make music and how their music has been able to be so influential over the years. And so the Tidewater Trio Project is just a way to honor them. My first try to honor them in a musicological and a historical way. And the best way to honor them and the work that they've done is to mirror them and how the story is told.
Well, thank you so much, Danielle, for sharing with all this with all of us. And thank you for joining us on Take on the South.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's been a great time. And listeners, like Danielle said, you can follow her on social media. There will be links to her social accounts on the episode description. And this is a recap. This is an interview with Danielle Davis, a PhD candidate in musicology at Florida State University. And this is your host, Emily Allen. And I'll catch you next time here on Take on the South.
That was our Take on the South. Let us know yours. Find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at U of SC South. Take on the South is produced by Matt Simmons of the Institute for Southern Studies. Special thanks to Professor Dave Garner of the University of South Carolina School of Music for composing our music. Tune in next time for another Take on the South.